I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but Aristotle is kind of a punk.
Ever wondered what makes a bee or an ant a queen? Is it because she holds a royal court, strategizing for the fate of the colony and leading military operations? Wait, does that sound a little absurd? For a long time, that's basically how naturalists thought it worked. Early insect enthusiasts liked to look inside of insect colonies, especially honeybee colonies, and try to learn how the world worked. But usually, what they happened to see inside those colonies was a pretty good reflection of how the society that they lived in worked. The earliest surviving writings about bees come from Aristotle, who noticed that inside of bee colonies there was one extra big bee, and of course Aristotle called that the king bee, which perfectly reflected the patriarchal society that he lived in. Philomena has this to say about Aristotle and his science.
Okay, so the thing about Aristotle, as well as so many other political philosophers, is that they claim that they're basing their political philosophy in natural philosophy. But actually, they're kind of doing the opposite, especially with Aristotle. He likes to use his natural philosophy to justify beliefs that he already holds about politics and about natural hierarchy. And there is no situation where that's more the case than when he's talking about honeybees and other social insects. So, yeah, Aristotle, I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but Aristotle is kind of a punk. He especially really likes to try to use nature to justify things like slavery and like the subjugation of women. So anytime that Aristotle, even when he's talking about something as ostensibly innocent as the natural world, read the fine print and also read between the lines, because a lot of the time he's actually trying to justify something pretty horrific. So when he's talking about honeybees, he's not just talking about honeybees.
And for the next 2,000 years, naturalists ran with this idea that the big bee or the big ant was a political leader who was a monarch and running their little society just like a medieval monarchy. And that's straight up wrong, because, well, medieval people thought that the queen bee was part of a hereditary line of rulers where queen bees produce new queen bees and worker bees produce new worker bees. Actually, the queen bee is the mother of everyone in the colony, and the same for ants. There's no hereditary class distinction within a typical bee or ant colony. A queen bee does not give orders. She's not a political leader. She doesn't tell the workers what to do. Workers make their own decisions based on the information available to them, and the behavior of a beehive or an ant colony is from the collective interactions of all of its members.
Some of the most fascinating behaviors that ants and bees exhibit originates in a non-hierarchical way among the workers, whose interactions with each other can lead to striking examples of self-organized and emergent complexity. One example is the honeybee waggle dance used by bees to direct sisters to new food sources. The discovery of this communication earned Carl von Frisch the Nobel Prize in 1973. Another great example is quorum sensing used by acorn ants to find new homes. In quorum sensing, workers are individually assessing new nest sites, but they're also paying attention to their encounters with other sisters. And by doing that, they can evaluate the consensus of the group. And once a threshold is crossed, the colony as a whole stops searching and then rapidly moves everyone, including the brood and the queens, into their new home. In both of these cases, the queen has almost no input at all in the decision-making process. In fact, when acorn ants emigrate to a new nest site, sometimes the workers physically pick up the queens and they will run them over to the new nest site themselves. But wait, so is she a queen or a mother or what? Historically, the queen was considered a king. Once people realized that this larger individual within the colony was laying eggs, and likely not a male, the language shifted to queen. Queen maintained the monarchist political legacy and the natural model.
So where does the word queen come from? This has a Germanic root, and it goes back to Old English quen, and if you trace it even further back, you get to the Proto-Indo-European root, gwen, meaning a woman. And this root also made its way into the Greek part of the Indo-European language family, where it evolved into gynos, meaning a woman, and also forming the root of the word gynecology. And this word also made its way into modern myrmecology as the word gyne, meaning an unmated queen ant. Something else that's cool about the speakers of Old English is that they actually realized that the big bee inside of a bee colony was a female. So if you look in the Doomsday Book of 1086, there are references to not a king bee, but a beomodor, or a bee mother, because they realized that the large bee was the one laying eggs. But of course, scholars of the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance preferred to take Aristotle's word as truth, and so there are references to king bees going up into the 1600s. Beomother is actually an incredibly apt term because being the mother of everyone else in the colony is a queen bee's primary job. She lays the eggs. That's what she does, not provide political organization.
This is a dangerous, slippery slope where scientists are using ideas from their culture and imposing them on the system that they're studying so that then other people can look at how we understand and perceive the natural world and use that as models to justify things like imperialism in society and the domestication and subjugation. For a long time, there was a lot of debate over whether or not the individual workers within a colony were males or females. It made sense for them to be male following the Western social and cultural norms, but they were found to have ovaries, and they don't generally mate or produce offspring, making their classification a lot more nuanced. And as it turns out, sex in ants and plenty of other animal systems isn't even close to binary.
If you study the histories of words and the way words are used, you're going to find there's a multiplicity of meanings and understandings and implications to the terminology that we use both in our everyday life and in science. In life, and specifically in science, it's good to think through and consider the implications of the terminology we're using. You start to find weird situations that don't really seem to match the mold.
Queens and workers aren't like rival factions within an insect society. They're both part of the family unit, and by embracing lots of different terminology for how we describe ants and the different components of an insect society, we can be more inclusive scientifically and think about all of the other things that social insect colonies are doing, including being homes for myrmecophiles and symbionts, and just in generally being respective of lots of more interesting types of complex social organizations.
Okay.